The story begins in a protected zone of a war-torn country. We see Agu playing with other children, holding a broken television frame with no screen. They use it as a prop to show programs to people in town, pretending the TV works. When they present their little show to a soldier at the edge of the city, he gives them food as a reward. Then we meet Agu's family, his mother, a homemaker, his father, a former teacher and now the leader of their small village, and his older brother. Later, on a dirt road, the boys cut part of a tree and block the path of passing cars, asking for money to remove it. An old woman called a witch curses them for tricking people. At home, we see the family's everyday life. Agu playfully puts his finger in his grandfather's mouth, pretending the old man is blind. Despite the difficulties they face, the family remains cheerful and close. But the smiles fade when Agu's father notices a broken roof tile, realizing Agu was responsible, and chases him. The next day, armored tanks arrive in the area. The villagers gather at the church, where they are informed that the National Reform Council, the government's military force, intends to seize their lands to counteract rebel militias operating nearby. An elder advises that women and children should evacuate, while the men stay to defend their homes. The following morning, Agu's father pays some locals to help his wife and daughter escape. Despite his mother's pleas, Agu refuses to leave the village. He watches her depart in tears, comforted only by his older brother. Fear takes over when the National Reform Council invades the village, forcing the remaining citizens into hiding. Agu's father takes his sons to a refuge where other villagers are concealed. But when one man panics and runs, soldiers discover their location. The group is forced to line up on their knees. The so-called witch is summoned to identify any rebels, but she denies knowing them. The soldiers, assuming they are insurgents, execute the men. Agu's father and brother are killed before his eyes. Agu manages to escape into the forest, running until nightfall, exhausted and crying. He finds an abandoned hut but no food. The next morning, while wandering through the woods, he chases after a man and stumbles into an armed skirmish. Captured soon after, he is brought before the commander of a local militia. The commander questions Agu, who explains that his family was massacred by government soldiers. Seeing the boy's anger and pain, the commander recruits him into his rebel group, the Native Defense Force, a militia formed to resist the government's reforms. As they travel through the jungle, Agu carries boxes of explosives. They eventually reach the rebels' main camp, where the commander is greeted with cheers. Agu and the other new recruits are handed over to a senior soldier for training. At first, Agu is mocked by the men for being too young. Still, he undergoes harsh military training alongside other boys whose childhoods were stolen by the war. The lieutenant in charge preaches that the government has stolen their land, and that they must fight to reclaim the future of their country. One night, around a fire, the commander gathers everyone and speaks of vengeance, that their families were slaughtered by government troops, and now it is their duty to fight back and build a new nation. A ritual initiation follows. The recruits are forced to walk through a corridor while being beaten and subjected to a mock execution, marking the end of their innocence and their transformation into soldiers. With the recent victory, the commandant rouses his soldiers, declaring that they are now an invincible army. Sometime later, under his orders, the group packs up their huts and prepares to move to a new location. Agu continues to serve as the ammunition carrier for his unit. When they reach a bridge, part of the group hides in the forest. The veteran soldiers order the recruits to stay silent and be ready to pass ammunition when needed. An ambush is about to begin. Soon a convoy crosses the bridge, and from the other side, one of the rebels fires an RPG at the lead vehicle. The explosion triggers a rain of gunfire, annihilating the soldiers and their trucks. The commandant appears, and his men bring forward the surviving enemies. Handing Agu a machete, the commandant orders the boy to execute one of the captives. For the first time, Agu truly understands where he is, trapped in a world where refusal means death. Under pressure from his commander's words, Agu strikes the man repeatedly until he collapses to the ground, then vomits in horror. As rain pours down, Strika, another boy soldier, gives him a change of clothes. The two begin to form a bond. Strika is mute and gruff, but soon proves to be someone Agu can trust. Days later, while the boys are playing, a helicopter flies overhead. They quickly run for cover in the thick jungle to avoid being seen. That night, around a campfire, the commandant tells stories of lands he once visited, places full of food and wealth. He promises his men that they will soon conquer such lands if they keep fighting. Later, the soldiers bring in a group of refugees. Among them, Agu recognizes people from his village, realizing it was destroyed by the army. The commandant decides to attack and take over a nearby town. The next morning, the rebels march toward the city. Amid the chaos, a bullet grazes Agu's arm. Over the radio, the commandant reports to his lieutenant that they're struggling against heavy enemy artillery. He calls Agu over, shows him the battle through a sniper's scope, and orders him to launch a grenade into the streets. Moments later, the commandant gathers his remaining soldiers, performing a ritualistic dance to rally their spirits and summon them into battle. The rebels storm the city, firing and detonating explosives. Leading the charge, the commandant waves a shamanic object as if to drive away evil. And through sheer persistence, they finally force the enemy to retreat. As night falls, Agu searches the fallen bodies, finding trinkets and keepsakes. He shows them to Strika, believing they might be valuable. Meanwhile, the commandant is on the radio with the supreme commander of the Native Defense Force. After the call, he praises Agu for his bravery in battle, telling him he could become a great leader one day. Agu shyly replies that he only wants to be a good follower. The commandant smiles and tells him, "To be a good leader, you must first be a good follower." Later that night, Agu is taken to a private room. Disturbed and trembling, he faces a trauma that leaves him silent and broken. The next morning, still shaken, Agu is approached by a malicious soldier who cuts his forehead lightly and rubs a strange substance into the wound, causing hallucinations and agitation. Under new orders, the rebels continue their campaign, moving through the jungle to attack government bases. Agu becomes increasingly ruthless, a child-turned soldier, stripped of fear and choice. He faces the brutal reality of war, no longer shocked by death or violence. Days later, the rebel group storms a city building. Agu bursts through rooms, shooting everyone in sight. In one of the rooms, he finds a woman and mistakes her for his mother. Realizing he's wrong, he and Strika discover a young girl hiding nearby. Moments later, Agu executes the woman with a mercy shot. Elsewhere, the rebels capture 2 enemy men, forcing them to kneel. Before the commandant, the prisoners have explosives stuffed into their mouths and are blown up as a display of dominance. Soon after, the commandant receives a radio message from the supreme commander, ordering him to report to headquarters. He complies, leaving the smoldering ruins behind. Agu, Strika, and several other soldiers join him in a convoy that drives through barricades into the capital zone. Upon arrival, they're greeted by a man in a suit who leads them into an office building. They wait for hours in a closed room, growing restless and eventually falling asleep. In the morning, the same man comes to summon the troops. They are escorted into a large government office where they meet the supreme commander. The officers take their seats, and breakfast is served at the next table. The supreme commander announces that, thanks to recent military victories, the United Nations and several other organizations are now seeking to provide aid to their war-torn country. He promotes the commandant to deputy chief of security and the lieutenant to battalion commander. The commandant is clearly displeased with the promotion. After dismissing the other soldiers from the room, he tells his superior that he is the one who made the battalion what it is, that he wants to stay in the field, leading his men in battle. The Supreme Commander warns him that continuing unnecessary operations in nearby towns could damage the nation's international reputation, as they are now trying to build a political image, not just a military one. The Commandant leaves without agreeing, but politely says farewell, claiming he will spend one more night with his men. That evening, he gathers the troops at a house and orders drinks for everyone in celebration. The newly promoted lieutenant asks permission to leave, but the commandant refuses, insisting that the night is meant to honor his promotion. The men drink, party with women, and hours later the lieutenant is found mortally wounded. When the commandant appears, He accuses his superior of orchestrating the incident but decides to cover it up. He then orders Agu to execute the woman who had been with the lieutenant that night. A brief funeral follows. The commandant lies to his men, saying the lieutenant was killed by orders of the supreme commander. Furious, he claims their battalion has been abandoned and must now survive on its own, defending its honor. That night, the once feared rebel group is ambushed in the jungle by the very military they once fought alongside. Many are killed. The survivors flee deeper into the forest, exhausted and starving. Agu, consumed by despair, begins to think that the only way the nightmare will end is if he dies in battle. As illness spreads and morale collapses, the commandant promotes one of the remaining men to lieutenant. The group continues moving through the jungle, but Strika is severely injured by a bullet from the earlier ambush. Agu refuses to leave him behind. Carrying his friend on his back, he walks until sunset, only for Strika to die in his arms. Devastated, Agu covers his body with leaves and leaves him behind in the forest. Eventually, the remnants of the militia take shelter in distant trenches. Agu is sent to look for ammunition, but when he returns, he reports that there is nothing left. No food, no bullets, and no will to fight. The new lieutenant tells the commandant they should surrender to the government forces. The commandant rejects the idea, but the lieutenant rallies the others. Surrounded and defeated, Agu is ordered to aim his gun at the man who once led them. Trembling, he cannot bring himself to pull the trigger. The commandant, realizing it's over, leaves them without a word. The group surrenders to the government army and is disarmed. Time passes. Agu is later seen in a protected rehabilitation center among many other children rescued from war. A teacher arrives and speaks with him privately, asking questions. Agu says nothing, but his silence tells everything. He no longer sees himself as a child. He is an adult trapped in the body of a boy, burdened with trauma and addiction to the substances he was once forced to use. Days go by. Some of the boys from his unit rebel, setting fire to furniture and shouting that they're being controlled. They urge Agu to escape with them, claiming they are soldiers who deserve to be fighting for their rights on the battlefield. Agu refuses, and they flee the camp. The next day, Agu meets with a psychologist. Though he barely speaks, his eyes reveal a lifetime of pain. When pressed, he finally says that he has seen and done terrible things, worse than the most savage beasts. Yet he adds that this was never what he wanted. What he truly desired was to have a family again, to love and to be happy. The film ends with Agu watching the other children play in the ocean. For the first time in a long while, he smiles faintly and walks toward the water, ready to do something he hasn't done in years. Be a child once more. This is the end. If you got this far, comment the secret word Uganda. Like and subscribe. Until next time.